Hi guys, good evening. My name is Joshua Lim. You might have seen me on the cameras when I'm helping out with the production team. I also help out at the children's church, so if any of you want to help out, we'll love your support. You can come find me after this. On behalf of Abby, Leon, and myself, I'd like to thank you guys for coming out tonight. If you might have seen in HTBB news over the past 2 or 3 weeks, or if you've been following church on Instagram, you know that the 3 of us are speaking tonight. So yeah, you had no reason to come tonight, unless, of course, you're coming here to make fun of us, but yeah. Thanks anyways. So yeah, tonight I got some pretty good stuff for you. Would you like to turn to Genesis 15, verse 1 to 6, please? It should come on the screen. Yeah. And then it says this. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. Then the word of the Lord came to him, This man will not be your heir, but a son, who is your own flesh and blood, will be your heir. He took him outside and said, Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, So shall your offspring be. Abram believed it to the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. So the first thing I want to share with you tonight is putting our faith in the Lord in our time of fear. I'm 27 years old, going on 28 this year. And over the course of my life, I've made quite a few executive decisions. Now, these decisions can vary in significance from the small things like what do I eat, what do I wear, what team do I choose in FIFA, to bigger things like what do I study, where do I study, where do I work, what do I say tonight. So yeah, I'm sure all of you can relate to making bold and difficult decisions. Now, when we make these decisions, we were brave. We believed in ourselves. And we had faith that things are going to work out the way we want them to. But life shakes us, and more often than not, as you may know, things don't work out the way we want them to. And in the aftermath of this, we are left reeling in fear, worried about the consequences of our actions. For example, an investment you made in the stock market might have gone bad and you lost money. Or the place you wanted to work in so badly turns out to be a horrible place run by terrible people. And a relationship you invested time and effort in with someone you love, and it breaks down, and you're left with a broken heart. I'm sure all of you have been through that. And that's where Abram finds himself after the events of Genesis 14. So his nephew Lot was captured by 4 kings in the east, and Abram rounded up his men to go on a rescue mission. And the rescue mission was successful. He managed to rescue his nephew, and with it, get back the spoils of war. Now, when he returned, he refused to take his fair share of the wealth on the premise that he did not want a worldly man to boast that he had made Abram rich. Abram was relying instead on God's promise to him that God would bless him and meet all of his needs. But again, the choices he made would come back and haunt him. He was left reeling in fear because he was afraid that the 4 kings would come back and take revenge on him. And he was also regretting that he did not take his fair share of a tremendous wealth. He had lost men, he had made enemies, and he gained nothing from this. But in the time of fear and doubt, he turned to God, and God told him in Genesis 15, verse 1, Do not be afraid, Abram, for I am your shield, your very great reward. Now, I don't have any children of my own, but I've got some experience working with kids in the children's church. So one day, we had arts and crafts session where we had to build a cross out of screws and strings. Now, for you, it might sound like a very simple thing, but for little kids, it could be quite challenging. So challenging, in fact, one of the little girls didn't want to do it because she was scared. And I asked her, why are you scared? So, well, if I do it wrong, you're going to scold me, or, my friends are going to make fun of me. FYI, we don't scold the kids. But I told her, hey, you know what? It's going to be okay. You can do it. If you need help, I'm here for you. And just like that, her frown turned upside down, and she got the confidence to do it. She didn't even need my help. All she didn't need to know is that I was there to help her if she needed me. Now, I'm sure all of you can relate to that. When you're lost, alone, and you just don't know what to do with yourself. But when the person you love the most comes and tells you, hey, you know what, it's going to be okay. And just like that, all your fears just go away. It's going to be okay. Now, coming back to verse 6, as soon as Abram believed God's words, all his fears disappeared, and so did his doubts about having a son. Now, in reality, his human situation didn't change. He still had nothing in his hands, but what he had now was faith in his heart. And that made all the difference. Now, guys, we're all God's children, and perhaps you're fearful or worried about a problem that you're facing. Turn to God with childlike faith, and just like Abram did, He'll be your shield and your great reward as well. And just like the little girl, all your fears will be taken away, and you too will be able to make your own keychain cross. So yeah, childlike faith takes away all your fears. But how do we know? So the second part I'd like to share with you today is God's promise for us. So carrying on from where we left off earlier, we now move on to the remainder of Genesis 15 from verse 7 onwards. All right, so it says this. He also said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to take possession of it. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it? So the Lord said to him, Bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. Abram brought all these to him, cut them in two, and arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half. Then birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and the thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterwards they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the fourth generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. When the sun had set and darkness has fallen, a smoking firepot and a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, To your descendants, I give this land from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates. Now, in every relationship, whether it's your family or friends, it's nice to know every now and again to be reminded how much you're loved. And if you don't, you start to doubt and you start questioning the entire foundations of your relationship. It's like, I guess that's why young couples ask each other, do you love me? I say, yeah, I loved you. I just told you that 5 minutes ago. So it's human nature, right? We need to be reminded and assured constantly. Just like Abram here. God promises him an heir, a son, and land. But he's still concerned because, for one, he and Sarai were infertile. And two, he was in a worse off position than he was before he rescued his nephew. So yeah, it's a cause of concern. So to reassure him, God makes a covenant with Abram. Back then, there were no written contracts, no documentation for you to sign, no paperwork, no nothing. So how people would make a covenant or promise with each other is they would take a sacrificial animal, split it in half, and walk through it together. Now, the reason for this, or what this signifies, is it signifies unity between the two parties. It signifies life and strength in unity, and death in separation. Now, I'm not saying that you should go bring your boyfriend or girlfriend and get a goat and split in half and go walk through it to declare your love for each other. It's just the way things worked back then. Yeah. So, yeah. Abram prepared the animals for the covenant and waited on God. But he waited so long that he fell into a deep sleep. I mean, cutting a goat in half is quite tiring as well, so he should be quite tired. So, yeah. As the sun set, whilst he was sleeping, a vision came to him. And he was still sleeping. A smoking firepot and a blazing torch appeared and passed between the carcasses. Again, Abram was sleeping, but by doing so, God completes his covenant and promised to Abram. And the only thing our friend could do is to receive the promise God has for him. God knows best what we need, and the promises he makes to us is premised on who he is and not who we are. But we need to believe in him. The greatest gift God promises us is eternal life and our salvation. And again, you need to believe in him. But even if we do believe in him, we might ask ourselves, how do I know? Lord, how do I know if I'm good enough? Lord, how do I know if I'm still worthy? Lord, do you still love me? Well, we know for sure because he sent his son to die for us. He chose to forgive us, even though we were condemned in our sins. Jesus was the lamb that was sacrificed on the cross, and God sealed his covenant with us through Jesus' blood. This is his promise and assurance to us. Our assurance of salvation does not depend on our flaky performance, but rather on God's sure promise. Us believing in him is as good as Abraham laying out the sacrifice, but in this case, we are sacrificing our lives. And like in verse 11, birds of prey will come and try to take away the carcasses or the sacrifice. Now, the birds of prey in our lives could be the distractions in our lives as we wait for God to give us the assurance to fulfill his promise. So, what do we do when we are waiting for that promise? Well, I hope you guys understand Irish because Abby is going to tell us.
Hello. My name is Abby Mcilrath. Okay. And I'm part of the team here at HTBB. I'm married to Stu, and together we oversee the worship and production teams. So we have just been introduced to Abraham and Sarah by Josh. And what we do know so far is that God has made them a promise. The promise that they will be the fathers of many nations. And in order to do that, they're going to have a baby. We also know that Sarah is infertile. She can't have kids, and that this promise didn't come true right away. Okay, our passage tonight, the next one, is Genesis 18. So let me set the scene for you. It's been some years after they've received the promise, 24 to be exact, and they are still waiting for a baby. Genesis 18 is just one afternoon, a snapshot out of these 24 years. So we're going to read from verse 1 to 15, and it will come up. The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre while he was waiting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat so you can be refreshed and then go on your way, now that you have come to your servant." "Very well," they answered, "do as you say." So Abraham hurried into the tent. "Quick," he said, "get 3 seahs of the finest flour and knead it and bake some bread." Then he ran to the herd, selected a choice tender calf, and gave it to a servant who hurried to prepare it. He then bought some curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them. While they ate, he stood near them under a tree. "Where is your wife Sarah?" they asked him. "There, in the tent," he said. Then one of them said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." Now Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself, as she thought, "After I'm worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure?" Then the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Will I really have a child now I'm old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son." But Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, "I did not laugh." But he said, "Yes, you did." I got married 6 months ago to Stu. And when you get married and you live with someone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you can learn quite a lot about yourself. I did not realize that I was so impatient, but I also didn't realize that Stu has some particular routines for his day. And there is one routine in particular that never fails to push my patience button: putting on his shoes. Now, I know this sounds really, really trivial, but when you are standing in the KL heat, heels on, carrying half your life in your oversized handbag, and getting sandwiched between the elevator doors you're trying to hold, and someone is measuring and tying their shoelaces with army-like precision, while sitting on a special stool he bought so he can perform the task comfortably. I really, really struggle with being patient, even for 5 minutes. 24 years. Abraham and Sarah had to wait for over 24 years, which is actually longer than I've been alive. My generation, we do not like to wait. You know when you're on Instagram and you're scrolling down and the little circle takes longer than 0.5 seconds to load the image, and you're like, why is this not working? We do not like to wait, even in those small things, but also in the big things. We're always waiting for something, for love, for kids, for work. But let's think about this. What if it's not just about what you're waiting for, but how you wait for it? This is what we're going to unpack briefly today. We see there are 2 ways to wait. Abraham and Sarah choose differently. And I think there's a temptation to say Abraham's really good and Sarah's really rubbish. That's not what we're going to do. They're a couple, they're married, they're a team. And throughout Genesis, they have moments of complete genius and other moments of complete idiocy. This specific part of their story is just one afternoon out of 24 years. So let's talk about Sarah. Sarah has put her identity in this promise. It had become everything to her. So when it didn't come true immediately, it made her bitter. We can see throughout her story in Genesis that she really, really struggles with this promise. I think it just goes beyond the boundaries of her faith. And at this point in Genesis 18, she's just run out of hope. And we know that because of her reaction in verse 12. It says she laughs to herself. And she just says something so sarcastic to God, like, after I'm worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure? Like, God, are you serious with this time? And look at my body. She has some serious attitude. And not only that, but when she's confronted about what she's just said, she just lies. I didn't say that. It's not just about what you're waiting for, but how you wait for it. Sarah is choosing a posture of inwardness. She chooses to look at her situation, her feelings, her body, and base the possibility of God's promise coming true on those things. Sarah knew she couldn't have kids when she was younger, so the possibility of having them now, pretty slim. But I don't blame Sarah for laughing. Like, you think of that burden that was on her, not to be able to have kids, not to be able to produce an heir. So it makes her bitter. The good news is that her reaction, her choices, don't get in the way of God's faithfulness. And even when you laugh at God, in his graciousness, he doesn't punish you. However, by choosing bitterness, it only makes the journey to the promise more difficult, tiring, and harder for her. It's not just about what you're waiting for, but how you wait for it. So what about Abraham? Was Abraham the holy half of this couple? Well, let's go back to the passage. It says it's really hot, so it's probably midday. And let's remember, there's no aircon by the trees. So it's really hot, there's no shade, and Abraham is just trying to lie down and get some rest. And then he sees 3 men standing nearby. At this point, he has a choice to make. Does he keep his head down, hope they don't see him, or does he get up and interact? It's not just about what you're waiting for, but how you wait for it. Abraham chooses a posture of outwardness. He immediately goes to the men. He bows to the ground in respect and shows them great hospitality. Because in this culture, your reputation was built on how hospitable you were. Abraham probably couldn't be bothered. It's really hot. He's really old, and he's been trying to get his wife pregnant for the last 24 years. He is tired. He has all reason to give the bare minimum, just pass himself. But that's not what he does. Abraham puts out the best meat. He goes down to the field to choose it himself. He doesn't send a servant. He gets Sarah to make fresh bread. He puts out milk, curds, and he serves his guests. He gives his best during his worst. Abraham had a choice to be generous, to invite the men in or let them pass by. But what does he gain from this generosity? Well, it tells us in verse 10. If Abraham had chosen to be selfish, bitter, and inward-looking, he wouldn't have heard from God on that day that there was only 1 year left to wait. It's so much easier when you know the timeline, when you can start the countdown and prepare yourself. He chooses to wait with outwardness and generosity, which wasn't just a benefit to those around him, but to him himself. Giving our best at our worst stops us becoming bitter because we're looking outwardly, not inwardly. It's not just about what you're waiting for, but how you wait for it. But where does this generosity come from? How does he muster up this energy? Well, in James 2, verse 23, he's described as God's friend. Abraham has struggled with God during these 24 years, and this waiting has just deepened their friendship. So he's able to trust him now. Abraham has now put his identity, his hope in God and not the promise. So what about you? What's the point in waiting? You may be in limbo, in between jobs, in search of a house, spouse, health, or help. Think about this. If God didn't want a deep, intimate relationship with you, then he would give you everything you wanted immediately. We change while we wait. And while we wait, God is at work, developing that deep, intimate relationship with him, readies us to receive the promise. It strengthens our character, and practically, it enables us to live from a place of outwardness. We can then be generous. We find the good news in verse 14. Is anything too hard for the Lord? That's the hope. That's what you hold on to, because God is faithful and he will keep his promises. But it's up to you to choose how you will wait.
Good evening, everyone. Okay, my name is Leon, and I serve on the two things, the worship team here, and I also do sound once in a while. So if you've ever thought, I really dig the sound at at HTBB, or I really like how smooth everything is, I probably wasn't on duty on that day. So, Josh has talked a little bit about what this promise was. Abby showed how Abraham waited on this promise. And what I'm going to share with you is how Abraham went through one of the greatest tests in the Bible. And this happens in Genesis 22. So what happens in this chapter? In short, God tells him all these amazing things that he's going to do. But he gives him one condition. He says, I give you all these things, but you have to kill your one and only son, Isaac, as a sacrifice. And amazingly, he says, okay. And he even goes almost as far as to, really, really do the deed until God intervenes. So, if you have a Bible, let's go together through Genesis 22. And if not, don't worry, it will come up on the screen. Genesis 22. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place that God had told him about. Now on the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." This is amazing. This fella did not wait. He went the very next morning, early the next morning. I don't know about you, but if it was me, I'd be like, nope, Tuesday is no good. Tuesday is gym day. No, Friday is not good either. Friday is a date night with the fiancé. Oh, a lot of you are laughing. I've probably used that about 100 times already. But what Abraham shows here is complete faith. I like what Josh said earlier. He had childlike faith to do something so ridiculous without questioning. Let's look at how ridiculous this must have been from a human perspective. Isn't killing someone an act of murder? Killing a child even. How is God going to fulfill his generational promise when he asks Abraham to kill his only son? Where are those descendants going to come from? Here's the worst thing. It wasn't something that he could just decide on and say, okay, done. I'm going to go kill my son. Job done. He had to travel for 3 days. 3 days with his son and his servants. That must have been excruciating. I mean, what kind of conversations must they have had along the way? How could you bear to look your own son in the eyes as you journeyed for 3 days? Oh, yes, son, it is a nice day out today, except I'm going to kill you. I find that just absolutely crazy. You see, he had so much time to change his mind. So much time. And all those questions we asked, those questions must have run on in his head over and over and over again. And yet he persisted. Why? It's simple. Because Abraham believed that if he was big in his faith, God would be big in his faithfulness. So we see here that God is a giver, right? He wants to give us good things. But, despite that knowledge, we still find it so easy to say no. Owen McManus, who is an American pastor and author, says this. He says, it's easy to be confident in what you have instead of what you hope for. You see, for Abraham, Isaac was what he had. And God's promise was what he hoped for. But then we see in verse 8 this tremendous peace and confidence. Abraham says to his son, After Isaac actually asks him, Father, what are we going to do? Where is the lamb? Where is the animal for the sacrifice? To which he just very coolly says, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. Abraham knew that as long as he obeyed, God would hold his end of the deal. The fact that he says, if we go back to what we read earlier, he says, we will come back to you. That kind of suggests that, he knows all this while that as long as he believes, God will provide a solution. I've often found, in my own life that God's always done far more than I could have asked for, far more than I could have imagined. Not long ago, I was asked to do a prophetic painting here at HTBB. It was for an alternative carol service. And I was terrified because I had never done anything like this before, let alone paint in front of an audience. But then I figured something. I said, aha, I'm going to reproduce a piece that I did not too long ago. And what this was basically biblical figures in black and white. And if you walk along the cafe or along the entrance, you would probably have seen some of those. It's not very difficult to do. It's just it's just stick figures, basically. So I said, okay, I had this amazing plan. I'll use those figures. Fine, I wouldn't need to prepare. I wouldn't need to think. I wouldn't even need the Holy Spirit, to be perfectly honest. So, I boldly went up on the stage, and I laid the first stroke. But then as I did so, rather inconveniently, I had this image of an eagle. And so I said, God, is this you? And, these thoughts started rushing through my head. I started arguing with God on stage in front of 100 people, saying, God, please, anything but an eagle. Give me a dog, give me a pencil, I'd never drawn a bird in my life. But here's the thing. That's when I sensed him say, you can't, but I can. You see, in that moment, I let go of my Isaac, which was painting figures in black and white. And I claimed God's promise to paint an eagle in color. God is always faithful in his promises. Let's go back to Abraham. We see that sure enough, God did provide a ram to replace Isaac. And how timely, right? How timely, because it goes like this. Abraham's about to kill his son, God intervenes, and there's already a ram ready to replace his son. So it's almost like if you can imagine, as Abraham and Isaac were walking up this mountain, you can imagine that God was sending this ram on the other side of the mountain. They were actually climbing up at the same time. But then God does something even more amazing. Not only does he provide a ram, he goes on to provide the ultimate, the perfect lamb, the perfect sacrifice for all of us. The one sacrifice that will fulfill his greatest promise. And that's Jesus. You see, this test wasn't just a random story in the Bible. It was a foreshadowing of the sacrifice of Jesus. Look at this. Both stories involved an only son. Both sons were bound on the same mountain. Yes, I figured this out last week. I didn't know that Mount Moriah was actually Calvary. It was just given a different name over time. And, just visually as well, both sons had carried something with them. So, Isaac carried the wood for the sacrifice. Jesus carried the cross. And here's the thing. Both sons were free from death on the third day. The only difference here is that God actually allowed his son to die first before bringing him back to life. So all this out of an act of obedience. John Maxwell says this. He says, learn to say no to the good and yes to the best. And the best kind of life is an obedient life. But living a life of obedience, it's not easy, because it could mean huge sacrifices on our part. It could be time, could be money, maybe it's something you enjoy. Or it could be a sin that you're holding on to in your lives that you just can't seem to let go or can't seem to break free from. Some of us here today, some of you may have a mountain to climb of your own. And you know what? Maybe you've lost hope. But here's the good news. Even when we are faithless in obedience, God is faithful in his promise. You see, even Abraham didn't get it right. As Abby shared earlier, Abraham made tons of mistakes, so many mistakes over that period that he was waiting. And yet, God still fulfilled his promise. He was still faithful in the end. I love what Josh said earlier, that this life we live is not about who we are, but about who he is. Abraham provided his son as a test. God provided his son to fulfill his ultimate promise to all of us, that through him, we will be brought back into relationship with him. So I just want to encourage all of us here today, if there's a mountain that you're facing right now, I just want you to remember that as you climb up one side of that mountain, God is already sending his deliverance on the other side, waiting to meet you at the pinnacle. Amen.